G'day everyone, it's James Davis from the Paxate Academy again, and this time I'm joined by Ian from Custom 365. How you going, Ian?
Hey, yeah, awesome, James. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on.
Well, thanks for joining me. Where are you based? By the way, you've got a funny accent.
You are, yeah. I'm currently in Auckland, but if you go back long enough in my history, I am English from the south coast of England, but I've travelled a lot. I think I left England. I think I've been away more than I've been in England. So yeah.
Well, it's awesome to have you, and I wanted to get you to join on and have a conversation because I'm having a lot of discussions with partners around the future for their business and how they're leveraging them 365 modern workplace platform. And you're a bit of an expert in this area. And I thought I'd start off with understanding what are you seeing with most MSPs and SIs? How are they utilizing the model workplace platform currently?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we see the massive potential in the whole Power Platform space. So, it's a tool set that is available to all Office 365 users, and obviously our drive is to encourage users to start using it and actually automate some of their business processes. Where the MSPs, I suppose, play that part is just around the guidance and then initiating that use case with that client. And so it's an interesting thing, like we've talked about it in the past, but essentially with the technology, going back 3 or 4 years, we were trying to drive that technology and the use cases with the client. But in the last 12 months, it has rapidly escalated to the point where we're getting clients directly coming through saying, we need some help and we need some support, or we've heard that the tool is amazing and how can we actually leverage it and use it. So we've definitely seen that transition between us convincing people that they need it versus them coming to us asking for it. And I suppose MSPs are in the same boat. And if you've got clients coming to you saying, you know, Johnny's created some workflows and, how can we support him in developing those? Or, along the lines of what actually commonly happens is someone in the organization created the workflows and no one really understands how they were created, and that it falls over and no one knows how to support and pick them back up, especially if that staff member left. And so I think that's really where the MSP plays their role, is just around that governance and the guidance around the best practices of there. But ultimately, I have no doubt that the MSPs are fielding questions around that Power Platform space, and therefore, internally, they need to upskill in that knowledge, and if they're already down that path, how they can leverage it for themselves to drive some value directly to that client around maybe some solutions and things like that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing the same thing talking with partners around uh, it's client demand, either directly saying we are already using that, we need the government governance, or they're asking in non-direct ways, and the MSPs aren't picking up that they need to look at the RPA type functionality in 365. And it's probably that it's a change of mindset, isn't it? Traditionally, MSPs and SIs have been very do a project, manage the environment. They're not really looking at that ongoing governance piece and that ongoing enablement side. And it's a different skill set. So what I might ask you is, like, if you're an MSP, you've been used to just looking after M365 basically around emails and files, and files is obviously its own kettle of fish, but what's the difference between that sort of mentality to starting to look into this sort of enablement and automation piece?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as typically as an MSP, you may, I guess, you need to change that conversation thread. So you're changing it from, replacing churning hardware and talking about security and things like that. And you actually need to start talking about the productivity gains and how that organization is working. Are there any gaps between handover of information between one department and another department, and how you could try and stitch those together a little bit better through some automation? Do they have repetitive processes? If you're doing the same thing 1,000 times, that's an awesome opportunity to build some automation in that space. There could be repetitive, not just so much on the process, but you have multiple data sets. So, you may have, a typical scenario might be from HubSpot to SharePoint to Xero, for example. So to streamline the data entry across those different platforms, there's lots of opportunities around there. And I think ultimately that's what's the cool thing about the space is, if you ask 100 people what they use PowerAutomate for, you're going to get 100 different answers, because it is so broad and so wide. And I think as an MSP, that's where we really need to drive some best practices and a little bit of governance to say, let Microsoft make it really easy for users to go ahead and create some content in there. But the downside to making it really easy is that it's obviously, you lose a bit of control and a bit of ownership and a bit of, that governance. But ultimately, I've seen some MSPs that by default, they turn all those services off, which I think provides no value to the client and the end user from having that tool set. So you're better off turning it on, but with a little bit of knowledge and some guidance behind it. So, our best practice is really, inside the Power Platform, you have what's called environments. So you create different structured environments, and by default, your user's environment, you limit that down to just the Microsoft services. So you're not exposing too much risk around integrating into third parties and SQL databases, and you're not bridging into that premium, that could be quite expensive. We've seen that before, where people have implemented a business process and now all of a sudden you need to license 100 users because they've gone into the premium services. So you create an environment that's fairly limited and fairly restricted, and that enables the users to start probing that automation to say, simple things like within our Microsoft space. So when I receive an email, I'm going to, continue with some actions, or when a document gets uploaded into SharePoint, we're going to trigger off some actions. So there's some simple things you can start engaging with the client around some of those business processes, but limited to a bit of a window of destruction that they could potentially cause. So you're limiting that risk really. Then you start looking at more environments around core business processes. And that's where it really transitions. And we find a lot of people have some issues around, staff members created a bunch of workflows, but they at the time they weren't business critical, but they have become now business critical workflows. And, with Power Apps and things like that, they've evolved to become business critical. And so how do you then manage those and then make sure that they continue to operate, and you have, error handling built in and things like that to actually make them business critical? And I mean, you must see it as well across the partner base, but if you think, some people have built business critical Excel spreadsheets. So if you think through that process, like someone has gone and, the Excel spreadsheet started as a table, then it evolved, and then they have drop downs, and then it's been shared with the company. And now their entire business structure seems to evolve around this Excel spreadsheet. And so as IT, we've had to put in some parameters around managing that Excel spreadsheet. And I don't really see PowerAutomate being too different from that. You're giving the users the ability to test and build, but at some point it switches over to become business critical. It's no longer the user just playing and building some automation for themselves. It's now rolled out to a team and a department and then the whole organization. And that's where you need to put in a bit of governance and control.
That's really interesting. I love the spreadsheet analogy because I've seen it. Everyone's seen a business run on a spreadsheet, but often MSPs have avoided the application layer. It's like, well, that spreadsheet's there. We make sure there's a backup. We make sure it's available. That's it. Hands off the rest of it. But what you're describing is you're actually having to get into the application and the process layer, where most of us aren't very comfortable in working through that. So what some of the skill set changes that we need to go through to develop, you've mentioned already around, we need to start asking better questions to start building an understanding. Then what? What's next?
Well, I think it certainly is a different mindset. I've always come from the business mindset, not the technology mindset. So, when people talk to me about their business problems, I can kind of picture the business process, and I can look at that automation breakdown. And therefore, back in my IT sales days, I wouldn't ever be talking to clients about the technology. I would always be talking about how they're going to implement it and how it's going to change them. And so, to me, going from, server operating system to the newest server operating system doesn't mean anything to the client unless it's actually going to change the way they work. And for me, I love that conversation about we're going to take your server infrastructure and we're going to put it in the cloud, because that's significantly going to impact and change the way that people work. The online collaboration and things like that through, SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams, that's been a massive shift in the way people work. And I think as MSPs, we need to leverage that conversation. It's like, you have changed the way you work, but did you know there is more? You can look at automating some of those things now that your services are in the cloud. You can look at, how you integrate to web applications and how you, streamline some of those processes. Like, now is the time to be having that conversation, even if it will be uncomfortable the first few times you do it, and it's going to be unknown territory. Shameless plug, that's why I would like to step in and have those conversations. But ultimately, as MSPs, you should be having those conversations and just saying, like, well, let's meet with your team as part of your QBR and we'll talk about efficiencies. It doesn't have to be a massive conversation in the first instance, but just, what's one of your pain points in one of your teams raised? I hate it how I have to do this every single Friday. Or, you only have to probe with that one question and people start complaining about their day-to-day grind of work. And then that's your opportunities, really, That's where you get started.
Yeah, and it is a mindset of just understanding. Like, I've given the example to a few people of just go into the office and go sit with the finance and admin people. They probably don't even know that they're inefficient and they've got problems. And if you're sitting there going, how do you do your job? What are you using? You'll probably see that they're spending 2 hours a day stuffing around with a spreadsheet, or they're having to double entry things across different tools. You don't need to solve it right away, but you can build up a list of capabilities at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the way we started with that, having those conversations, is we would offer just simple training. So, like, how to use Outlook, how to use Excel, and that type of thing. But the next step of the training was to do a floor walk. So walk around and actually observe how people are working. And it was a combination of showing them the possibilities of what they could do, and then looking at actually how they work. And sometimes it was really obvious, and you just look and be like, well, hang on, you have two windows open, and how do you communicate between one window and the other window? And so sometimes they're really obvious, and sometimes they're not so obvious, and you have to start probing and asking more questions. The other opportunity, I think, the massive one, is to, as an MSP, if you understand your vertical markets, then there are business processes that are, they overlap and they are common across those verticals. So, if you're in the medical space and you understand how a GP works and what their limitations are, then you can start looking at, if you can solve the problem for one, you can solve it for, 1,000, and so as an MSP, like, do you get into that level, and do you have a vertical market? I'm not going to get into the marketing strategy around verticals, but, do you have a vertical market, and do you understand how they work and how they operate, and therefore, can you come up yourself with the ideas to build some automation and some integrations in through there? And that's how you then start that conversation. So you're probing, you're not asking them how you can help, you're saying, you're telling a story. This is what we've offered to other people. Does that help you? And then what else can we offer, and how can we grow that automation side?
I think that's some very good advice, and I think to start developing your skills is you start doing it in your own business. Like MSPs, we've tended to just go and look at a whole bunch of shiny tools, chuck them all together. We haven't necessarily looked at the process and the systemization and integration, proper integrations between them, and looking at it at that sort of level. So there's a lot of opportunity for ourselves to drive the efficiencies and improvements and develop those skills internally, to start asking the questions, start being able to visualize the process and mapping what systems get used for what, and where's data being stored, all of that kind of thing, to then start doing what you said, like leap into doing it for a client. Maybe for a client, one of your A class clients, you do it for free as an exercise just to learn the first time and then start charging for it. But from your experience, do you see many people in MSPs that actually have that business mind and those skills to work like that?
Well, it's interesting what you say, because MSPs have the mindset internally, 100%. You know, we've been driving for, I mean, it must be 10 years now, on how to build automation to script our own processes. You know, Intune and stuff like that encourages it, and all the tool sets are now all about automation. But yeah, I very rarely see the MSPs have transferred that over as an experience into their clients. Yeah, it's a interesting space. I think it maybe is just a concern of taking that first step. But once you have taken the first step, it snowballs, and you know it becomes repeatable at that point. So definitely worthwhile. You just got to be brave and have that question, have that first step with the client. Like you say, I don't know about if I agree with offering it for free, but yeah, sure. Use it as a use case and build up that use case, and then give you some encouragement to go forward with the next one for sure. Yeah.
I think from my experience looking at the MSP with that sort of automation side, it's very much been the technology side. It's never been looked at from a process and people side. So we can, inside our MSP, we've obviously got our PSAs, and then we've got another tool to plug in that might do some form of automation or improvement. But they're sort of out of the box, and we're just buying the shiny thing off the shelf to solve a specific problem. We're not actually going through the process of step by step, what is the process, what's the outcome that we need, and then making decisions on what the technology is. We're seeing, oh, there's a burning issue. That tool sounds like it's going to solve. We're just going to plug it in, and we don't necessarily understand the ROI. We don't necessarily understand the efficiency gains, all of that kind of stuff, because we don't work at the application layer. Like, I think I keep coming back, I keep repeating that, but I just don't think we look at it that way. We look at it as a infrastructure-minded end user support side of, well, we'll just reduce the noise. Let's move on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, our MSPs have notoriously always been stuck in the technology layer and that infrastructure, and you know, our vendors are all driving us down the path of either, you know, the infrastructure management or security management and things like that, and it's very rarely transitioning into that productivity space.
So we're starting to build up a picture of how someone gets started, but in the tool itself, like, how do you start getting that skill to actually do the process automation?
Yeah, well, obviously there are templates that you can leverage. So out of the box, you can start looking at what's already available, and that's a good space for inspiration to see what can be done and what other people have published as templates. So that's one good opportunity. Just, you know, you could do it now. You know, go and have a look and see what templates there are, and encourage your clients to do the same. So, you know, maybe raise some awareness or some education around the possibility of launching a Power App, and then looking at some templates for them to start probing and automating it. The next thing would be to actually start looking at like one of your own internal business processes and how you would start, you know, automating that process. Now, I don't know, there's obviously Copilot that's being launched inside of the Power Platform, so there's the ability to actually use an AI robot, and you describe the business process you're trying to achieve, and it will build that workflow for you. It works for the standard actions that are available inside of PowerAutomate, but anything that's slightly more complicated and a bit custom and out of the box, then that's not going to work. But, you know, if you just said, well, let's take that email process again. So when I receive an email, I want it to create a list item and then notify my team and in Teams that we've received that email. Something very basic like that, then you'd be able to describe that through Copilot, and it will be able to build that services for you. So yeah, massive opportunity there for that. Copilot automation. But there'll be a template for that one for sure.
And what sort of technical skills do you need when you start getting into the more complex stuff outside of the sort of straightforward templated inbuilt Microsoft stuff?
Yeah, sure, yeah. So it's all based on pretty much JSON code, and you've got your HTTP posts and your actions there. So if the action doesn't exist already, so I mean, for those that have never seen PowerAutomate, but it is basically a trigger and a series of actions. And you could define your triggers based on, a trigger of an event happening, so receiving an email or someone's added a file or, something has happened. And those types of events are built by the application itself. So, a SharePoint event would be a file has been uploaded or a list item has been modified. An Outlook event, obviously you received an email or someone has accepted a meeting invite or something along those lines. So you have the actions based on the application itself. You can have time-based actions, so you could have a trigger to say, once a day, once a minute, or once a month, then you're going to follow a path. Or you have manual-based triggers, so when you click a button, it's going to fire off and run that action. You can get a little bit more complicated, so you can start building your own triggers based on webhooks. And so if you understand webhook technology, then you could build your own triggers and actions. And so if you imagine you got the trigger, something fires it off, and then you've got a series of actions. Out of the box, you have again, templated actions based on the application. So you can have like Word document automation, you've got SharePoint automation, you've got Outlook automation, and things like that. So they're all blocks, and you just start building them up. Where it gets a little bit more complicated and you need a little bit more of experience around that developer mindset is when you start building your own either custom connectors. So, for example, HubSpot doesn't have any actions built in as a connector inside of PowerAutomate. So you would have to build those out yourself. So you either build what's called a custom connector, so you're defining what the logic is and what the fields are that you're updating and what the steps are in that workflow. Or you're using HTTP post, which is a premium function inside of the Power Platform, so you'd need premium licenses to do it. But that's the same for custom connectors as well. So as soon as you start developing those types of things, you need licensing. That's probably the trigger, just thinking about it. That'll be the trigger that as an MSP that your clients are probing beyond the user's use case. So you're now moving away from being just a user wants to automate something for themselves, and they've now transitioned into that business critical function when they start needing the premium licenses because they're trying to integrate into external software applications or SQL databases and things like that. So as soon as someone starts probing you for licenses, then yeah, they're heading down that pathway for sure. So you should be having that conversation. Anyway, you can start building your custom HTTP post or GET requests, and then you're pinging external services to pull that information in. And then you're building like loops, so for every document in a library, you're looping through and making some changes, setting some metadata and that type of thing. There's, we probably don't have time to go through a whole training exercise, but there's so much you could do, whether it's looping. But anyone who has a scripting background, so, if you've used your, ConnectWise Automate and all those tools, if you know how to loop or you can PowerShell, then, you're going to be in a good position to at least do the bulk of the work inside of PowerAutomate. Yeah.
Okay. And I know I don't have those sort of skills. I've played around with a bit of PowerAutomate and used ChatGPT to give me the JSON codes, and it worked. I obviously wouldn't sell that because I wouldn't know how to support it and fix it if things broke or needed to be changed, but there's enough out there to help enable you to get started, which is pretty cool. Well, I'm curious. You're mentioning licensing, and what springs to my mind is how do you monetize PowerAutomate? Well, it seems to me straight off the bat, it's just like a project, and you're one and done. Is that the case?
It could be, but no. I mean, us MSPs are all about the recurring revenue and how we can actually build that side of the business. And so how we do it is we have obviously the project for the implementation and design and build of that automation. But It does take support, and there is long-term support. So we have error handling built into all of our workflows so that we get notified at different points through the workflow if there's failures. Then we can go in and, you know, we fix them and correct the workflows, because you'll be surprised. As much you can whiteboard it as much as you like, but you're still going to forget things that, you know, a user's going to do something that you hadn't anticipated, and so, you know, the workflow breaks. So we build the support in as part of our managed services. So Power Platform managed services essentially. The biggest thing actually is around that. We mentioned it before, but around the governance. So if you're allowing users to create their own workflows, what are you putting in place to ensure that the workflows are, you know, backed up and saved? If there's a failure, can you restore it back to a previous version? The ability to essentially, if you turn off a user and the user has provisioned that automation, then and this is probably our biggest lead source, is they've deactivated the user and all the workflows have stopped working. So it's actually, how do you build an infrastructure that is not tied to an individual user? It is tied to the organization, and therefore the users can come and go, and they're not designated owners of that workflow, and therefore the continuation of the flow will still run. So we wrap around that governance, and then of course user training. So the tool's always evolving, and there's always new features and functions, and the way that things operate always change. So then we wrap around training and education services for that space as well. So that's how we monetize it. We don't focus on the licensing so much. It's all the other services we can wrap around. Yeah.
Okay, so is this a cheap service, or is this high level premium stuff that you're having to do?
Well, actually, I should probably mention the other revenue stream we have is building templated solutions. So I mentioned before about understanding a vertical market. So if we had a brand new prospect come to us with a completely unique business process, then they would be paying us as a project work to go through that process of design a consultation and figure out, you know, how we're going to integrate into all those different systems. If we can understand a need in the vertical market, and we can say, well, we know that this is repeatable, then we actually sell that as a SaaS solution. So we actually deploy that, and, you know, we support it and everything under that SaaS, and we continue to evolve it. So, you know, once we've deployed it to 10 clients, we have a much better understanding of that business process. And that, you know, across those 10 clients, they start asking for, you know, ads, moves and changes, or, you know, they want to add a different feature in here. So then we can evolve that solution. So our solution becomes a much deeper version of an automation than you would have for a single client. And so, yeah, under that vertical space, we do template them, and then therefore we can rapidly deploy them. We don't charge, you know, it's not the project consultancy work. We just sell it on a SaaS, and say for a monthly fee, you can continue to use that. We have to build some extra infrastructure in there for us to be able to turn on and off those services. You know, assuming if they stopped paying, for example. And that's where you start branching into what's called logic apps inside Azure, rather than running it as through PowerAutomate. But those two apps are very similar. They have a lot of overlap in the functionality, but that's again a different conversation. But yeah, so we run that SaaS model. That's how we leverage that.
Okay, and to get to the point that you are now in what you're doing, how long did it take to build this practice? Because it sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, it is quite a lot of work. We've been running for 4.5, nearly 5 years now, building solutions for people, and, you know, we're forever picking up new problems and new challenges with customers. So every customer we get, there's always something new, and we're having to either use our templates as the base. So we try and work on that 80-20 rule. So if we could develop a template that fixes 80% of the workflow, once we've deployed it, we can customize the last 20% to get it to fit to that business process. That makes it easier for us to support as well. So we already understand how that workflow operates, and we're not building it from scratch. Like I mentioned earlier, though, a lot of our work now is taking over existing workflows that other people have created. And that's obviously a lot harder to unravel and try and unpick how other people have created their workflows. So that is a bit more of a challenge, definitely, yeah.
Okay, and so let's talk about an MSP building and starting up this practice. It's taken you about 4.5, 5 years to get to the point you are. How many people would someone need to actually have a mature practice like you're talking about? Because I'm assuming most people can't do all the different skills. There's different people doing different parts of this. Is that
Yeah, so as an MSP, you may start the conversation, but then of course you're going to train up one of your resources or a few of your resources to be able to deliver those services. I suppose the risk you have as an MSP is, tying a particular skill set to a small individual or a small group of your team members. I guess it exposes you to some risk because you may then get to a point where you've got 100 clients and only one technician can actually service and support them. So I suppose that, and in those early days, building that support structure to sell it and then deliver it and then manage and maintain it, going for that longevity. It is something you're going to have to consider. But it's like any service. You would have gone through the same thing moving into the security space. You may have had like one really proactive security lead technician, and then that whole practice has evolved in your organisation, and you become a MSSP, delivering security services. So, we are used to it in our industry. You just have to make a start, go down that pathway.
Yeah, I think you've got to want to know, are you investing in that as a practice or is it a supplementary service? And that's probably where the partner to partner play comes in. You've either got to like really invest in it and drive it and have a big focus, or it's you've got your core focuses and you're recommending and you're bringing in a partner to do this on your behalf.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's why I created the company, was because I understand that there is a gap. There is a skills gap in the MSP market, and therefore we can partner with MSPs to deliver those services. And so MSPs are not having to in-house train or, long-term support or any of those other issues that come with building that new, business practice. But you can bring us in and we can start having that conversation and supporting those clients. And so on that note, we have... we talked about clients transitioning to now coming to us, asking us, but we now have MSPs coming through. I'm not having to, probe them around what their use cases are for the Power Platform. We have MSPs coming to us saying, we know you do good work, and can you support our clients? And so that's usually the trigger point. Is one of their clients has started asking, they don't know how to deliver it, so they ask us. And of course, the more their clients ask, then there could be the opportunity that they look at building that as in-house resources.
And there's huge opportunity for this. Like pretty much every business can leverage RPA, and Power Platform's a really good place to do it because most of our clients revolve around the M365 tenancy, and they're probably going to more and more as like Dynamics and Business Central become more SMB friendly, and there's a lot more consolidation. It's sort of a great place to start with that RPA side. We could talk about this all day. I love RPA and process and people and enablement and change. This is why I do what I do. But we've covered a lot of different topic areas. What would you want people to most take away from this conversation? If they're going to take one thing from today's episode, what do you want them to take away?
It has to be to start having conversations with your clients about productivity. Try and uncover some of those pain points that they're experiencing as an organisation. How are they going to leverage some growth? Cost of staffing is going through the roof. Heading into recessions and people spending less money. The only way to really thrive in that space is to look at automation and productivity gains. So we need to be having, as an industry, we need to be driving those conversations with our clients. So that would be the number one. Number two would be to just start playing. Just start looking at your own internal business processes and seeing what you can deliver inside that Power Platform space, for sure.
I think that's some great advice, and I would say I'd back that up of staying to have the conversations, because if you don't, someone else will. And I'm seeing the churn and Microsoft is seeing the churn of clients moving from one MSP to another, and it's based on maturity a lot of the time at the moment. So if you don't get in on this, you're gonna miss the boat. So thank you so much for coming on, Ian. It's been great. I've learnt a lot as well, which always excites me. So I hope our partners take away a lot of your great wisdom. So thanks very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, James.